On a freezing winter afternoon, a hard-working mechanic was rushing to fix a bridge before the storm hit. But as he neared the icy crossing, he saw a car flipped over in the snow, with a young woman trapped inside. Without hesitation, he stopped, braving the storm to pull her out. He carefully helped her into his truck and drove her to his cabin, offering her warmth and shelter as the storm raged on. He had no idea that this simple act of kindness would change his life forever. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. The blizzard hit Mill Creek like a hammer. Snow blasted across the highway, burying fences and muffling the town in a heavy silence. At 60, Darnell Carter had seen plenty of Colorado winters, but this one pressed down on him harder than most. The wind pushed against his pickup as if it wanted him off the road. His wipers slapped across the windshield, fighting the ice. He leaned forward, jaw tight, thinking of Emily safe at the neighbor's house. She was only 6, too little to be left alone. He promised her he would be back by breakfast. The old creek bridge came into view through the swirl of white, its wooden beams groaning under the weight of snow. It was his responsibility to keep that bridge alive, one of the last maintenance jobs he still held in town. He planned to check the planks, tighten the bolts, and file a report before the county inspector came around again. Every paycheck counted. The rent, the heating bill, the groceries, there was never enough. Then his headlights caught a flash of red, hazard lights, blinking weakly through the snow. His stomach dropped. A sedan had spun sideways across the bridge, the front end crumpled against the guardrail. The windshield was fogged, but he saw movement inside. An arm, a hand pressed against the glass. Darnell yanked the wheel, skidding to a stop. He left the truck running, headlights pointed at the wreck, and shoved the door open. The wind hit him like a fist, nearly taking his breath away. He stumbled forward, boots sinking deep, snow tearing at his coat. The driver's side was crushed in. He tried the handle, it wouldn't budge. He slammed his shoulder against the frame once, twice, until the metal screamed and gave way. Glass nicked the back of his hand, a sharp sting swallowed quickly by the cold. He didn't stop, his heart racing as he pulled the woman from the wreck. She was limp, face pale, her lips tinged blue. "Stay with me," he muttered. For a heartbeat, he pictured Emily strapped in like that, alone and freezing. The thought pushed strength into his arms. His fingers fumbled with the buckle until it clicked free. He dragged the woman out, the storm clawing at them both, and staggered back to the truck. He laid her across the seat, chest heaving, his breath fogging the glass. The engine was still running, heater blowing weak warmth into the cab. He reached over, turned the heat toward her, and pulled the blanket he kept for Emily from behind the seat. He tucked it around the stranger as if she were his own, checking her breathing once more before leaning back. Even though every second mattered, Darnell quickly glanced at the damage to his truck and the bridge before pulling Sophia out. He could feel the weight of the work he was leaving behind, but right now, he couldn't afford to leave a life in danger. He whispered softly as he placed her in the truck, "I'll get you through this, but the bridge, I'll fix it later." Outside, snow already covered the boards where he had meant to work, piling into the cracks he was supposed to seal, burying the bolts he was supposed to tighten. That bridge was his pride, the last steady link between him and a paycheck. Watching it sink under snow felt like watching his future disappear plank by plank. The storm had made his choice for him. He looked at the woman again. Her chest rose faintly, shallow but steady. That fragile rhythm was proof his choice hadn't been wasted. The truck idled, the storm howled, and Darnell Carter sat gripping the wheel with his hands stinging, knowing he had just traded the job that kept his family afloat for the life of a stranger. The drive back from Old Creek Bridge was slow and tense. Snow whipped against the windshield, the wipers smearing white across the glass. In the rearview mirror, Darnell caught a last glimpse of the bridge vanishing under fresh drifts. He knew he should have stayed to check the planks and bolts, but the choice had been made. The young woman slumped against the passenger door, barely breathing. Saving her came first, no matter the cost. On the way back, Darnell stopped at Mrs. Duffy's house. The power had gone out, and Emily was there, hugging her mother's photo tightly. She looked up when Darnell entered, her eyes wide and full of quiet sadness, her small hands clutching the frame as if it were the only piece of comfort left. Without a word, she climbed into the truck, curling into him as he started the engine. Mrs. Duffy gave him a nod, but said nothing. She looked past him, down at the woman in the passenger seat, but the storm was moving in too fast for any more words. Darnell drove carefully through the growing storm, the cold biting through the truck's worn seams. He thought of Emily sitting behind him, safe for now. When they finally arrived at the cabin, the cold seemed to flood in even before he opened the door. The engine rattled in protest, the cold making it hard to turn the key in the ignition. The wind howled, pressing against the walls like it was trying to get inside. He helped the woman inside, gently lowering her onto the old couch by the fire. Her skin was cold to the touch, her clothes soaked from the snow, and she was still out cold. Without thinking, Darnell took off his heavy coat, his only real shield against the storm, and draped it over her. His own sweater clung to his back, damp with sweat and snow, but he brushed the discomfort away. He needed to focus. As he moved around the cabin, Emily stood in the doorway, watching him carefully. "Grandpa, who is she?" she asked, her voice quiet, eyes filled with caution. "Someone who needed help," Darnell replied softly. He didn't want to say too much, not yet. The storm outside was bad enough, but inside, it was quieter. The weight of responsibility hung in the air, filling the small space between them. Emily looked at him, her eyes searching, sensing something wasn't right. She hugged her mother's picture tighter, eyes flicking between the stranger on the couch and the man she trusted most. Darnell quickly moved to the kitchen, eyes lingering on the shelves. The cupboards were nearly bare. 2 cans of soup, a box of crackers gone soft, and half a loaf of bread that was stale at the edges. His heart sank as he stared at the meager supplies. Tomorrow he was supposed to turn in his maintenance report on the bridge, but now the bridge was buried under snow. The bolts were loose, the wood swelling from the ice, and he couldn't help but think about the paycheck that would never come. He poured the soup into a dented pot, adding a little water to stretch it. The smell of food started to fill the room, faint but comforting. Darnell placed the bowls by the fire, handing one to Emily and setting the other near the sleeping woman. For himself, he broke off a piece of bread, not bothering with a plate. The cabin was too small for anyone to be formal now. Emily took her bowl and sat close to the fire, her eyes never leaving the stranger. Her voice was small but firm. "She looks cold, she can have my blanket too." Darnell smiled softly and touched her shoulder gently. "You've done enough, sweetheart, just eat your supper." His chest tightened at her words, feeling the warmth of her kindness fill the room. In the middle of a storm that had already taken so much, this small act of compassion seemed to be the one thing they could hold on to. The fire crackled, the wind raged outside, and for a moment, despite the storm's fury, the cabin felt like a refuge, not just from the cold, but from the world outside. There in that small space, warmth and kindness had found their way in. Morning light seeped pale and gray through the frosted window. The storm had eased for a few hours, leaving the cabin blanketed in silence broken only by the hiss of the fire. Darnell sat at the kitchen table, the small radio crackling beside him. The county broadcast repeated the same notice: all inspections delayed until roads reopen. Missed maintenance logs may result in partial pay deductions. He rubbed the folded scrap of paper where he had copied it down, jaw tight. Half his paycheck gone, that meant rent pushed back, shelves staying bare. A soft cough from the couch broke his thoughts. He looked up to see the young woman stirring beneath his heavy coat. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then darted around the room. When she saw him, she tried to sit up, shivering hard. "You pulled me out," she whispered, her voice raspy. Darnell moved closer, steadying her with a hand on her shoulder. "Yes, ma'am. You were trapped on the bridge. It's a miracle you're breathing." Her gaze softened, and for a moment, the weight in the room lifted. "Thank you, I'd be dead if you hadn't stopped." He gave a short nod, not a man for long speeches. "Name's Darnell Carter, this here is Emily." Emily peeked out from behind the chair, clutching her mother's photograph against her chest. The woman managed a faint smile. "Sophia," she said simply. No last name, no explanation, just Sophia. Darnell didn't ask further questions. He'd learned that some answers were better left unspoken. He ladled out the thin soup he had stretched with water the night before, filling 2 small bowls. He slid one toward Sophia, one toward Emily, and sat back with nothing more than a strip of stale bread in his own hand. Emily balanced the bowl in her lap, slurping quietly, eyes fixed on the stranger. "Why'd you come to Mill Creek?" she asked with the bluntness only children had. Sophia froze, spoon halfway to her lips, her fingers tightened around the strap of her backpack resting on the floor. "Just passing through," she said finally, eyes dropping to the table. As she shifted, the zipper slipped open. A small black USB drive slid out, clattering softly onto the wooden boards. Emily bent down instinctively, but Sophia's hand shot out first. She scooped it up quickly, shoved it deep into the pocket of her coat, and forced a smile that never touched her eyes. Darnell noticed, chewing his bread slowly, the taste like dust. He said nothing, but his glance lingered on her tightened grip around the backpack. Between the fire's warmth and the woman's guarded silence, the cabin felt even smaller, as if the storm outside had followed them in. As Sophia settled back against the cushions, still shivering despite the warmth of the fire, Darnell leaned over, checking her vitals. He brushed the back of her forehead gently with his fingers, making sure she was warm. "You're safe now," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the anxiety gnawing at him. "I'll get the heater up more," he added, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Despite his concern for Sophia, there was a nagging thought in the back of his mind. The bridge, he hadn't been able to finish his work, and now it felt like a lost cause. He could only hope that he could fix it once the storm passed. "I'll fix it tomorrow," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Emily, sitting on the rug with her bowl of soup, looked up at him and smiled faintly. Her small voice broke the silence. "Grandpa, do you think everything will be okay?" Darnell's heart softened, and he smiled back at her, reaching out to touch her shoulder. "We'll get through this," he reassured her softly. "Everything's going to be okay." There was a fleeting moment of peace, where the fire crackled in the hearth, and the storm howled outside, but inside the cabin, warmth lingered between the three of them, filling the space with something more than just survival. It was a quiet promise that no matter how much they had lost, they would face it together. The storm showed no sign of giving up. By late afternoon, the radio crackled again, the emergency channel repeating the same words it had the night before. "All roads closed. Entire county remains under lockdown until further notice." The voice was flat, distorted by static, but the message was clear. Mill Creek was cut off. In the kitchen, the shelves told a blunt truth. The pot of thin soup was scraped clean at noon, and Emily had eaten half a slice of bread with hers. Only one can of beans remained on the counter, its dull tin glinting under the lantern light like a reminder of how little was left. Darnell leaned against the counter, arms folded, his mind raced through the practicalities of what needed to be done. The bills stacked on the counter, the notice from the radio about inspections being delayed, and the heavy reality of his likely pay cut. Rent, oil and new boots for Emily, each need stacked heavy in his mind. The weight of it pressed him deeper into the worn cabinets, and he swallowed hard, fighting the rising panic. But just as he was about to turn, Emily's small voice broke through his thoughts. She sat curled up in the blankets by the fire, her small hands cupped around the mug he had handed her. "Tastes funny," she said, her nose wrinkling after a sip, but then she grinned, and offered it toward Sophia. "You can finish mine if you want." Sophia shook her head quickly, her face softening. She reached out to gently touch Emily's hair, her eyes warm despite the harsh circumstances. "You keep it, sweetheart," she said, her voice steady. For a brief moment, the cabin felt less like a refuge for strangers, and more like a family pressed together against the storm. The silence in the room was no longer cold or oppressive, it was filled with a quiet understanding, a reminder that they had each other, even in the face of overwhelming uncertainty. Darnell glanced at the sparse shelves again, the small can of beans glinting at him in the dim light. He knew they couldn't make it much longer on what little they had. The bridge was still waiting, and with every passing hour, his worries about it grew. He hadn't been able to complete the work, and the paycheck was already slipping away, along with the warmth they would need in the weeks ahead. As if sensing the shift in his thoughts, Sophia rose, her movements quick and restless. Every few minutes, she approached the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to peer out into the storm. Each time, she let it fall, her shoulders tightening more with every glance into the white wild expanse outside. Darnell watched her from his spot by the counter, the weight of her unease pressing against the quiet air. Finally, unable to ignore it any longer, he spoke up. "You looking for something out there?" His voice was low but steady, a simple question that carried more concern than he intended. Sophia startled, turning too quickly, and for a second, she seemed caught between hiding her worry and revealing it. She gave him a thin smile, forcing the tension away. "Just checking the storm," she replied, her hands twisting the strap of her backpack, her knuckles turning pale from the strain. Emily lifted her chin from her knees and watched them both in silence, her wide eyes moving between Darnell and Sophia. The fire hissed softly in the background, while the wind howled like a creature clawing at the door. The cabin, once a safe haven, now felt smaller than ever. 3 people huddled together, warmth mixed with worry, and a silence that carried more weight than the snow on the roof. As the evening deepened, the storm outside raged on, but inside the cabin, Darnell, Sophia, and Emily held their own quiet struggle, each person wrapped in their thoughts, yet sharing what they could. The fire crackled, the wind howled, but for now, they were together, and that was something to hold on to. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, casting a dull orange light across the cabin walls. Outside, the storm howled on, battering the roof, rattling the shutters. Emily had curled up near the hearth, her small body wrapped in a blanket, her breathing deep and even. The photograph of her mother rested near her hands, the frame catching the firelight. Darnell sat at the table, shoulders bent, staring at the folded county notice he had pulled from his pocket again and again. Half his pay gone, just like that. He thought of the can of beans left in the cupboard, the oil bill due in 2 weeks, and the look on Emily's face when she realized Christmas would come with nothing under the tree. A cold weight settled in his chest, but it was not the worst of his worries. A soft cough broke through his thoughts. A voice, low and unsteady, carried from the couch. "I don't think it was an accident." Darnell looked up to see Sophia sitting up slowly, her face pale, the strain clear in her eyes. She was still wrapped in his coat, her hands tightly gripping the edges of the blanket around her. Her gaze flicked toward Emily for a brief moment, before it returned to him. She lowered her voice even further, as if trying to keep the weight of her words from reaching the sleeping child. "The brakes," she whispered, her voice raw, "they didn't feel right before I hit the bridge. I checked, just before I blacked out. The line, it looked cut." Darnell's jaw tightened, the familiar sense of unease growing in his gut. He didn't answer right away, instead moving toward the couch. He adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, his hand lingering on the fabric longer than necessary, a silent gesture of comfort. "Stay warm," he said, his voice low and steady. "We'll talk later." Sophia nodded faintly, her fingers curling around the fabric of the blanket, pulling it closer. "Somebody wanted me off the road," she added, her eyes dropping to the floor. The room fell into a heavy silence. The storm outside raged on, its wind howling through the cabin, but it only seemed to heighten the quiet that settled between them. Darnell didn't know what to say. Sophia's words weighed on him. Danger was always lurking outside, but now it seemed it was at their doorstep. His gaze shifted toward Emily, asleep by the fire, her small body curled into a tight ball for warmth. Darnell's stomach tightened again, but it wasn't just worry for her anymore. It was the realization that he had already made one sacrifice. The bridge, the job he relied on, had been left half done, and now, this woman, this stranger, had brought with her more uncertainty, more danger. Danger he might not be able to protect them from. He glanced at the fire, the flickering flames casting long shadows across the room. The silence between them felt heavier, sharper as the wind howled outside. The warmth of the fire was a small comfort, but it did nothing to dispel the unease gnawing at him. The storm raged on, but inside the cabin, it was as if the silence itself was the greatest threat. The knock came just after noon, sharp and deliberate against the heavy door. Emily jumped, spilling a few crackers onto the rug, and Darnell stiffened where he sat at the table. No one visited in weather like this. Not unless they had a reason. He opened the door to find Mayor Franklin Reed standing on the porch, snow plastered across his coat, a smile fixed too neatly on his face. Behind him, the storm pressed hard, filling the yard with drifts that reached nearly to the windows. "Afternoon, Carter," Reed said warmly, too warmly. He held up a small paper sack. "Making rounds, checking on folks. Thought you could use a little something." Darnell stepped aside reluctantly. Reed brushed the snow from his shoulders and set the sack on the table. Inside were 2 tins of vegetables and a half-empty pack of coffee filters, more for show than real help. "Storm's been rough," Reed went on, eyes drifting around the cabin. He lingered on the extra coffee cup beside the stove, then dropped to the floor near the door where melting snow had formed more than one set of footprints. "You've got company, Emily," Darnell said flatly, jerking his chin toward the little girl by the fire. "And you know me, I always keep a spare cup around." Reed chuckled, but his eyes stayed sharp, calculating. From the kitchen doorway, Sophia pressed herself against the wall, breath caught in her throat. The sound of his voice alone sent a tremor through her hands. She dared not move. After a few minutes of small talk, Reed pulled his gloves back on. "Stay safe, Carter. These storms, they separate the careful from the careless." His smile lingered an instant too long before he stepped back into the whiteout. The moment the door shut, Sophia's knees gave out and she sank onto the chair. Her face had gone pale, her hands gripping the strap of her backpack until her knuckles showed white. "You know him?" Darnell asked, though he already guessed the answer. Her eyes lifted, wide and frightened. "I'm not just passing through," she whispered. "I'm a reporter out of Denver. I've been following Reed for months. He's skimming federal relief money, funneling it through false projects, and tying it to drug operations in the county." She swallowed hard, her voice breaking. "My brakes weren't an accident. He tried to kill me." For a long moment, the only sound in the cabin was the crackle of the fire and the moan of the wind outside. Darnell turned away, staring at the dark window pane. The name Reed had been around his life for years at ribbon cuttings, parades, budget meetings. He thought of the night his son lay in a coffin, face hollow from years of addiction, and how Reed had stood on stage weeks later promising to make Mill Creek drug-free. His fists clenched against the table. The mayor's words were lies. His son was gone, and now this woman carried proof of what Reed really was. By evening the storm had buried the fences and half the porch under drifts. Darnell pulled on his boots and stepped outside to gather more firewood. The air was sharp, cutting through his damp sweater, and the silence of the snow was broken only by the static of a CB radio drifting from a neighbor's barn. "Word is a reporter from Denver's stirring up trouble. She's holed up with Carter out by the ridge. Man's sheltering her, says she's spinning lies about the mayor." The voice carried just far enough for Darnell to catch it. His jaw tightened. He stacked the logs in his arms and turned back toward the cabin, but not before he saw a figure in the yard across the way, his old friend Howard Miller, the same man who once helped him patch the roof after a hailstorm. Howard met his eyes, then looked away, shaking his head slowly. Inside, Darnell set the wood by the fire. His hands lingered on the logs longer than they needed to. Emily watched him closely, sensing the shift in his mood. "What's wrong, Grandpa?" she asked. "Nothing you need to worry about," he said, but his voice came out rough. Sophia sat near the window, peeking past the curtain as she had all day. Her posture stiffened at the sound of the radio chatter outside, though she didn't say a word. Darnell lowered himself into the chair, staring into the flames. He knew this town. He had worked on their cars, plowed their driveways, shown up when their tractors stalled, but all it took was one rumor, and now he was the outsider again. The black mechanic, who sided with a stranger against the mayor, everyone thought they knew. Word spread fast in a place like Mill Creek. By nightfall, the CB radio carried talk of meetings, of people demanding answers. And tucked into those same transmissions came another note. Judge Robert Hale, traveling back from Denver, had been stranded by the storm, and was staying with Pastor Collins in town. His name passed quickly on the airwaves, just another fact, but Darnell caught it. He wondered if the man might end up seeing this mess firsthand. The fire cracked, the storm pounded the roof, and the cabin walls seemed to close in tighter with every passing hour. The storm had not stopped, but the townspeople came anyway. The hall was lit by lanterns and backup generators, benches filled with men and women wrapped in heavy coats, snow melting in puddles at their boots. Franklin Reed stood at the front, hands spread wide, voice carrying over the crackle of the old speakers. "We are a strong community," he declared. "We don't let outsiders come in and tell us who we are. But that's exactly what's happening. A so-called reporter, here in Mill Creek, spreading lies about your mayor. And Carter," he let the name hang for effect. A man many of you trusted now hiding her in his cabin. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Darnell sat on the side bench, jaw tight, Emily pressed close to his arm. He saw familiar faces turn toward him. Neighbors he had fixed cars for, friends he had shared coffee with, now looking at him like a stranger. The tension in the air thickened, the weight of old friendships crumbling beneath the pressure of Reed's accusations. Reed's voice grew sharper. These people want to divide us when what we need is unity. Don't let them take our town down with their lies. Sophia stood slowly, clutching her backpack. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied as she pulled a small drive from her pocket. You want the truth? It's right here. Federal funds meant for Mill Creek, stolen. Projects that never existed. And I can prove it. She set the USB on the table by the projector. With the help of a deputy reluctantly manning the laptop, files filled the screen, contracts signed by Reed, invoices for equipment that never arrived, photographs of half-built structures meant to be shelters but left to rot. A hush fell over the hall. For a long moment the room was frozen. Reed's smile faltered, but he raised his chin. Fabrications, he snapped. Anyone with a computer can fake papers. Don't be fooled. Darnell's heart pounded in his chest, and he could feel his stomach tightening. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of what was at stake. He glanced at Sophia, who stood unwavering at the front, then at Emily, who was clutching his sleeve with a grip that spoke volumes. The silence in the room seemed to stretch on forever, but then Darnell rose to his feet, his knees feeling unsteady under him, his chest tight with anxiety. But his voice, when it came, was steady. It's not fake, he said, his voice cutting through the murmur of disbelief in the room. I buried my boy 2 winters ago, because of drugs in this town. I watched him waste away while Reed stood up here promising change. Now you see where that money went. He let his words hang in the air, letting them sink in. His gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of familiar faces now turned cold and uncertain. This isn't about outsiders, this is about the truth. The room shifted. People who had leaned forward toward Reed now leaned back, uncertain. A few exchanged glances, whispers rising. For the first time that night, Reed's certainty cracked, a bead of sweat forming at his temple. He stammered, This isn't over, Carter, but the words lacked their usual conviction. Darnell stood firm, knowing what he had to do. He wasn't just fighting for Sophia anymore, he was fighting for the truth, for his son, and for the future of Mill Creek. As he glanced toward Sophia, he saw her nod in silent agreement. They weren't backing down. Not now, not ever. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, and the shift in the atmosphere was undeniable. This was the turning point. For a long moment after the files appeared on the screen, the hall was silent except for the hum of the generator. The townspeople shifted in their seats, eyes flicking between Reed at the podium and the documents projected in front of them. From the front row, Margaret Ellis, 75, a lifelong resident and one of the town's most respected voices, rose slowly to her feet. Her cane tapped against the floor as she pointed toward the screen. Franklin, she said, her voice clear despite her age. You've stood in this hall every winter telling us the money was spent right. If these papers are lies, then explain them to us. Explain the missing funds. Murmurs swept through the benches. Reed's smile tightened. Margaret, don't let them fool you. These outsiders are trying to break us apart. A chair scraped from the side aisle. Judge Robert Hale stepped forward, snow still clinging to his coat from the walk over. I may be stranded here by the storm, he said, but I know forged documents when I see them. These aren't fake, they're official contracts, filed with the state, and every one of them traces back to the mayor's office. The murmur turned into a low rumble. People leaned toward one another, whispering fast, the weight of Hale's words tipping the balance. Reed's face flushed red. He slammed a fist on the podium. Enough, that woman doesn't belong here. If she thinks she can drag my name through the mud, she'll regret it. His eyes cut toward Sophia, cold and sharp. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A mother pulled her child closer. Men in heavy coats exchanged looks, unease shifting into anger. Did you hear that? Someone shouted from the back. He threatened her. Another voice rose. What else has he been hiding? The rumble built, voices overlapping, until one broke through clear and loud. Resign. Others joined in. Resign, resign. The chant rolled through the hall, louder than the storm outside. Two deputies moved uncertainly at the edge of the room. Reed barked at them to quiet the crowd, but they hesitated, eyes flicking between the chanting townspeople and their cornered mayor. Finally, with no other choice, they stepped to Reed's side and guided him toward the exit. As the noise swelled, Darnell stood by Sophia, his hand gently gripping hers. He could feel the pulse of her worry, but he squeezed her hand tighter, his own thoughts unwavering. Sophia's gaze flickered briefly toward him, the weight of the moment hanging in the air. She didn't speak, but the connection between them was palpable, built on the shared struggle that had led them here. The chants of "Resign" continued to echo in the hall, growing louder, more insistent. Darnell stood firm, his gaze never leaving Sophia. His hand tightened around hers, as they both faced the uncertain future. "We've come this far together," he thought, his resolve hardening. "We won't back down now." The chanting grew louder as Reed was ushered out, the door slamming behind him with finality. Inside the hall, the people of Mill Creek sat in stunned silence, the fire of betrayal and relief mixing in their eyes. For the first time in years, Reed no longer owned the room, and for Darnell and Sophia, this was just the beginning of their fight. 6 months later, Mill Creek looked different. The snow had melted, returned, and melted again with the seasons, but what remained was more than weather. The town had pulled itself back together. Under temporary leadership, committees opened the books, budgets were posted on bulletin boards for all to see, and projects long promised were finally underway. Franklin Reed was gone from office, waiting for trial in Denver. Sofia Alvarez's series, Mill Creek and the Blizzard of Truth, circulated far beyond Colorado. For weeks reporters called, and letters arrived at the town post office. What she had risked her life to uncover had become a story of ordinary people demanding honesty. For Darnell, life found a steadier rhythm again. The county had docked him half a paycheck for the bridge, but the new council quietly restored his contract when they saw how close he'd come to losing everything for doing the right thing. His garage reopened, tools lined up neatly as before. He carried no scars on his hands, but he remembered the cost in other ways: the cold nights stretching food, the looks of suspicion from neighbors, the weight of choosing to help a stranger when it could have ruined him. On a bright afternoon, Emily played in the yard with other children, her laughter rising into the clear winter air. The shy, uncertain girl who once clutched her mother's photograph had found her smile again. That evening, at the town hall, Darnell stood before his neighbors. He wasn't a man of speeches, but the room quieted as he looked around at the faces, some still cautious, many now respectful. "Snow can bury us," he said slowly, voice steady, "but when it melts it leaves the ground clean. And that's where we plant the seeds for what comes next." The hall filled with applause. Sophia smiled from the front row, and Emily ran up to hug her grandfather's side. For the first time in years, Mill Creek felt lighter. The storm had taken much, but it had left behind something stronger, a town that had finally faced the truth, and a family that had found hope again.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.